The ocean is black tonight, not dark blue, not silver, black, like ink spilled across the world. USS Waller moves through it at reduced speed. Her bow cuts the water without ceremony, without sound, leaving only a thin scar of foam that disappears almost instantly. No running lights, no signal lamps, just steel, motion, and restraint. Below deck, the ship hums with a low mechanical breath. Turbines turn, shafts spin. The deck vibrates softly beneath boots planted wide for balance. Every man aboard feels it, the quiet tension that settles in when the night refuses to give anything back. On the bridge, red lights barely illuminate faces. Eyes flick between compass, radar, and the black horizon beyond the glass. The radar screen glows faintly green. A slow sweep. Another, then a trace. Not clear, not solid, just a whisper of something where nothing should be. No one speaks. Orders are not shouted on nights like this. They are passed hand to hand, eye to eye. Speed adjustments, course corrections measured in degrees, not miles. The ship responds immediately, obedient as a trained animal. Somewhere forward, a gun crew waits beside 5-inch barrels aimed at emptiness. The metal is cold to the touch, damp with sea air. The smell of oil and salt hangs heavy, mixing with the faint tang of cordite from drills run earlier in the evening. A young sailor swallows hard. He listens for the sound of enemy engines, hears only his own breath inside the steel skin of the ship. The radar blip fades. Was it real or imagination? USS Waller does not relax. She never does. She keeps moving, cutting silently through black water, carrying more than 300 men who understand one truth of night war at sea. You do not win by being seen. You survive by being patient. The ocean closes behind her. USS Waller was never meant to be gentle. She was built fast, lean, and purposeful. A Fletcher-class destroyer shaped by necessity rather than pride. Laid down in American shipyards while the war still burned across oceans, her hull took form under welding arcs and hammer blows, each plate fitted with the expectation that it would one day be tested by fire. When she slid into the water in 1943, there was no illusion about her destiny. She was not a battleship meant for headlines. She was not a carrier that would dominate maps. She was a knife, forged to slip into chaos, strike hard, and vanish again. Her hull stretched just over 370 feet, narrow enough to cut seas cleanly, strong enough to take punishment. Below decks, boilers fed steam to turbines that could drive her past 35 knots when ordered. Speed was life. Speed was escape. Her weapons reflected the same philosophy. 5-inch guns, capable of firing at ships or sky, manned by crews drilled until motion became instinct. Torpedo tubes sat midships, silent and lethal, holding weapons designed to kill without warning. Depth charges waited at the stern, ready to be rolled into the sea for enemies that never showed themselves. But steel alone does not fight wars. Waller's true strength arrived aboard in the form of her crew, farm boys, city kids, men who had never seen the ocean before the Navy put it under their feet. They learned quickly that a destroyer did not forgive mistakes. They learned the sound of the ship before sleep, the steady thrum of engines, the hiss of steam lines, the occasional metallic groan as hull plates flexed against the sea. They learned the smell of fuel oil soaked into everything they owned, They learned how sweat felt when mixed with salt and fear. On paper, USS Waller was a number. DD-581. At sea, she became something else. She became a shared responsibility. Every valve turned mattered. Every radar contact mattered. Every order passed from bridge to engine room, traveled through human hands, and those hands could not tremble. Not when night erased distance. Not when the enemy used darkness as cover. The Pacific did not offer front lines. It offered moments. Sudden violence. Long stretches of waiting that gnawed at nerves far worse than gunfire. Waller was designed for those moments, to escort, to screen, to strike when needed, and to absorb danger meant for ships that could not evade it. She did not promise glory. She promised duty. And as USS Waller pushed westward into a war fought in shadows, her crew began to understand what kind of ship they served on. Not a symbol, not a legend, a blade. Moving quietly through the dark, protecting others who would never know how close danger had come. They would learn soon enough that in night combat, survival belonged to those who listened harder than they spoke, and trusted steel, training, and each other when the sea turned black and the radar began to whisper. Night came early in the Pacific, and it stayed. For USS Waller, darkness was no longer an absence of light. It became a condition, something you learned to live inside, like pressure or cold. The men discovered quickly that daytime rules did not survive after sunset. During the day, the sea offered reference points, a horizon, a sky, the illusion of space. At night, everything collapsed into a single mass of black water and darker air. Training intensified as the ship moved deeper into combat zones. Radar drills replaced visual spotting. Bearings were called out in clipped, precise tones. Range estimates were trusted even when instinct rebelled against them. Sailors learned to believe a glowing line on a screen more than their own eyes. Below deck, the Combat Information Center never truly slept. Green light washed over tense faces as operators tracked contacts that might be friendly, might be enemy, or might vanish without explanation. Sweat gathered despite the cool air, running down spines, soaking collars. Hands hovered over plotting tools, ready to redraw reality at a moment's notice. On deck, gun crews drilled in near total darkness. Commands passed quietly, almost respectfully, as if loud voices might give the ship away. Metal clanged softly as breaches were checked and rechecked. Barrels were elevated toward nothing at all. The smell was constant: diesel fuel, hot oil, electrical insulation, the faint metallic scent of the sea itself. It crept into lungs and stayed there, becoming inseparable from memory. Sleep came in fragments, short, uneasy stretches broken by alarms, course changes, or the sudden tension that rippled through the hull when the ship altered speed. Men learned to rest fully clothed, boots within reach, helmets never far from hand. They also learned fear's quieter form, not panic. Expectation. Expectation that the next radar sweep would show something new. Expectation that silence might break without warning. Expectation that if the ship was hit, it would happen so fast there would be no time to understand it. USS Waller practiced running dark. No lights, no smoking topside. Even a careless spark could betray her position for miles. Cigarettes were cupped in palms below deck, smoke exhaled slowly to avoid triggering alarms. Officers spoke less at night. Orders became shorter. Eyes did more work than mouths. The ship herself seemed to listen, responding instantly to small adjustments of rudder and throttle. Somewhere in those long nights, something changed. The crew stopped thinking of darkness as an enemy. They began to treat it as cover. Waller slipped through waters where enemy ships hunted by sound and shadow. She learned how to exist without announcing herself, how to move with intention rather than speed, how to wait. Patience became a weapon as real as any gun aboard. Radar contacts came and went. Most led to nothing. Some did not. Each time the tension spiked, each time it faded without action, the crew grew sharper, more disciplined, more connected. They learned each other's movements, voices, and silences. Fear did not disappear. It became manageable. Because in the dark, USS Waller was no longer just steel and machinery. She was a living system. Every man dependent on the next, every breath synchronized to the slow, deliberate pulse of the ship. And when the night finally demanded blood instead of patience, they would be ready. They did not know when that moment would come, only that it would come suddenly, without warning, and without mercy. The first shots always felt unreal. There was no dramatic build-up, no warning flare cutting the sky, just a sudden change in the air, a tightening in the chest, and then the order that snapped the night in half. General quarters. Steel doors slammed shut. Alarms howled through passageways already alive with running feet. The ship seemed to wake all at once, every compartment shifting from waiting to action in a single breath. On the bridge, the darkness ahead remained unchanged. No visible enemy, no reassuring silhouette. Only radar returns tightening into something undeniable. Range closing. Gun crews moved without conversation. Gloves slipped over damp hands. Breaches opened. Shells were lifted, heavy and cold, their metal biting into palms slick with sweat. The deck vibrated as engines surged, the pitch of the hull changing as Waller angled toward a threat no one could see. Then the guns spoke. A 5-inch salvo ripped forward, the muzzle flash briefly painting the ship in harsh white light. For a fraction of a second, faces appeared, strained, focused, unreal. Then the darkness swallowed everything again. The sound came next, a deep concussive thunder that rolled across the water and echoed back from nowhere. The air smelled instantly of burnt powder and hot steel. Ears rang, chests rattled. Return fire was impossible to see until it was almost too late. Shell splashes erupted nearby, towering columns of water glowing faintly in reflected firelight. The ocean itself seemed to explode around the ship. Waller heeled sharply as the helm corrected, her narrow hull carving hard turns designed to spoil enemy aim. Orders came fast now. Course changes, gun elevations, new bearings shouted from combat information. Radar tracked movement that eyes could not confirm. Somewhere out there, another ship was fighting for its life in the same blindness. There was no room for hatred, no room for triumph, only procedure. Load, fire, correct. Fire again. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched, minutes vanished. The deck shook with every salvo, vibrations traveling through bones and teeth. The smell grew heavier. Cordite layered over oil, smoke clinging low despite the open sea. A hit was felt before it was understood. Not on Waller, nearby. A distant explosion flashed low on the horizon, brief and final. Radar contact blurred, then fragmented, then disappeared entirely. No cheers followed. The guns ceased fire almost as abruptly as they had begun. Silence returned in pieces, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the rush of water along the hull. The ship slowed, cautious, ready for a threat that might still be there. Men exhaled without realizing they had been holding their breath. Damage reports came in. Minor, none serious. Waller had done her job and remained intact. Another vessel, enemy or not, had not been as fortunate. But there were no heroes in that darkness. No one saw faces. No one heard final words. The night accepted violence without commentary, erasing details as quickly as it revealed them. USS Waller moved on, leaving behind only disturbed water and fading echoes. The crew reset their stations, hands shaking slightly now that adrenaline drained away. Someone wiped sweat from their eyes and left a black streak of grime across their cheek. They understood something new after that night. Victory at sea was not loud. It was quiet, impersonal, and deeply lonely. The darkness did not care who had fired first or who had fired last. It only cared that the guns eventually stopped. And as USS Waller resumed her silent patrol, her crew knew there would be other nights like this, other battles fought without witnesses, other moments where survival would depend on discipline rather than courage, because in night war, courage was assumed. It was restraint and control that kept you alive. Morning did not arrive with relief. It crept in slowly, diluted by haze and exhaustion, turning the Black Sea into a flat, lifeless gray. USS Waller reduced speed, her engines settling into a steady rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar after the violence of the night. On deck, the air was cooler now. The smell of cordite lingered, stubborn and sour, trapped in corners and seams of the ship. Metal surfaces were streaked with salt and soot. Gun barrels radiated residual warmth, ticking faintly as they cooled, each sound sharp in the new quiet. The crew moved differently after a night battle. Voices stayed low, jokes did not come easily. Men avoided looking too long at the horizon where flashes had burned hours before. The ocean showed no evidence of what had happened, no wreckage, no bodies, just rolling water, indifferent and clean. Below deck, damage control teams finished their checks. Reports were concise, nothing critical, no compartments lost. USS Waller had escaped untouched in any way that mattered. That knowledge brought no celebration. In the mess, coffee was poured and left untouched. Hands shook slightly as mugs were lifted, then set down again. Eyes looked past one another. Sleep deprivation blurred edges, but memory stayed sharp. Someone finally asked the question no one wanted to voice. Did we sink them? No one answered immediately. Radar had shown a contact breaking apart. Gun flashes had ceased. Logic suggested the outcome. But certainty did not exist in night combat. There was no wreck to point to. No confirmation beyond instruments and probability. The absence weighed heavily. At morning muster, names were called. All answered. Relief moved through the formation quietly, almost guiltily. Somewhere else, on another ship, another list might not have ended the same way. The thought settled into the crew like damp cold. Steel has a way of holding sound. After battle, USS Waller seemed to amplify every small noise. Footsteps echoed. Doors closed louder than necessary. The hull groaned softly as the ship rolled, a reminder that she was still alive, still moving, still carrying everyone aboard. Men found excuses to busy themselves, cleaning weapons that were already clean, checking equipment that had been checked twice already. Movement kept thoughts at bay, but silence always returned. In that silence, faces from home surfaced. Kitchens, fields, city streets, things that belonged to a different life. The contrast made the steel walls feel closer, heavier. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, calm now, offering no explanation for the violence it had hosted hours earlier. It was impossible not to feel small. USS Waller did not pause to reflect. Orders came. A new course. Another assignment. The war did not allow time for processing what had been done or survived. As the ship turned and built speed once more, the crew carried the night with them. Not as triumph, not as trauma, but as weight. The kind that settled deep and stayed there. They understood now that battles did not end when the guns fell silent. They ended later, in moments of quiet, when there was nothing left to do but remember, and remember they would, because silence, after combat, was never empty. It was full of everything that could not be said. USS Waller did not earn a nickname. She was not spoken of in bold headlines or remembered for a single decisive moment that changed the course of the war. Her service blended into 1,000 other missions. Escorts completed, nights endured, dangers deflected rather than confronted head-on. That was the point. She screened larger ships as they crossed hostile waters, her radar sweeping constantly, her guns trained outward into the dark. She chased contacts that turned out to be nothing. She held formation through storms that punished steel as harshly as enemy fire. She remained alert when boredom threatened to dull edges more dangerously than fear ever had. The crew aged quickly in small ways. Faces grew leaner, movements more economical, laughter rarer but more meaningful when it came. Men learned who could be trusted in silence, who stayed steady when alarms shattered sleep. USS Waller took no fatal hits. She did not sink beneath the waves or burn on the surface. She survived by doing exactly what she had been built to do: move, protect, and disappear again. As the war pushed forward, new ships arrived. New crews rotated in and out of danger. Waller continued her work, one more gray shape among many, holding lines together where they might otherwise fray. When the fighting finally slowed, there was no ceremony at sea. Orders changed, routes shortened. The constant edge of readiness softened, though it never fully disappeared. Men allowed themselves to imagine something beyond the next watch rotation. Eventually, USS Waller turned back toward home. Her decks bore the marks of service: worn non-skid surfaces, paint scarred by salt and sun, machinery that had run hard and faithfully for years. The ship was tired in a way only sailors recognized. She had carried everyone through. After the war, the Navy no longer needed so many knives in the dark. USS Waller was decommissioned quietly, her guns removed, her systems shut down one by one. The hum that had filled her spaces faded for the last time. Steel that had once sliced through black water now rested in stillness. There were no crowds, no speeches, just paperwork, and men who paused briefly before leaving, hands brushing bulkheads as if saying goodbye to something alive. USS Waller was eventually dismantled, her steel repurposed, her name removed from active roles. She vanished without drama. But survival without glory was her greatest achievement, because every ship she guarded, every crew she helped deliver safely through the night, continued on, and that mattered. The Pacific is quiet again. The same waters that once echoed with gunfire now carry only wind and waves. There is no sign that a destroyer ever cut through this darkness, hunting shapes on a glowing screen, trusting numbers more than sight. USS Waller exists only in records now, in photographs, in the memories of those who served aboard her, memories shaped by vibration, heat, exhaustion, and restraint. She did not demand remembrance. She earned it through consistency, through nights spent unseen, through discipline that prevented catastrophe, through a refusal to break formation when breaking away might have been easier. Steel sleeps, duty does not. Somewhere a modern ship moves through another dark ocean, guided by different instruments, crewed by different hands, but governed by the same quiet principles: patience, control, responsibility. USS Waller carried those principles through a war that offered little room for error, and when the screen finally fades to black, what remains is not spectacle, but respect. For a ship that survived, for a crew that stayed steady, for silence that once meant safety.